Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast. It's Wednesday, May 13th, and I'm Blair Kerkhoff. About 3 weeks ago, star columnist Vahe Gregorian and I had the pleasure of spending time with baseball icon George Brett. There are so many topics to cover with George, but Vahe and I spent much of the time talking about the season 40 years ago, 1980, when George pursued hitting .400 and all that came with it. That summer, Brett and the Royals captivated baseball, and the team made its first World Series appearance. We talk about that experience. George has covered much of this ground before, but there were some stories I hadn't heard. He expands on the pressure of that summer, what his and the team's thoughts were heading into the final game of the season, and his thoughts on former managers and other stories. Trust me, you will enjoy this. Of course, with the Chiefs some 3 months away from the Super Bowl victory, we started by talking Chiefs because that's what we do in Kansas City. So here we go with George Brett and Vahe Gregorian.
Well, what a great run the Chiefs had. That was something, wasn't it?
Oh, it was, and I know someone like you who, I mean, you've become pretty invested in everything Kansas City. I'm sure it was very gratifying for you to see that.
It was great. I've gotten to know Andy Reid, and I know Mark Donovan pretty well. I've gotten to know Patrick Mahomes a little bit. Brett Beach has become a great friend. Travis Kelce, met him, played golf with him a few times with Patrick, and I couldn't have been happier for all those guys. It was fantastic. Yeah. And you don't really realize it when you're playing what it means to the city when you go out there and you win a championship. But as a spectator, just sitting back watching, even though I was in Arizona during the game, it's just amazing the effect that it does have on our city. It was just one of the greatest things that I've experienced outside of baseball since I've lived in Kansas City.
Well, that's a neat jumping off point to take a look back at 1980, which was also quite a time for the city and quite a time for you. And one of the things that we got chatting about a little bit, or I got thinking about as we decided to talk to each other, was there were so many magical things about that season. But today it's April 22nd, and on this date, you went 0 for 4.
I was hitting about 120 probably.
Believe it or not, it was 209.
209. Boy, that was good.
Well, knowing you, we figured
having a good year.
We figured you knew each at bat that day. I think it was against Toronto, but the reason I bring up that date was in a sense sort of the jumping off point because from there on out, basically, other than when you were out hurt, you were on fire for the rest of the season.
Was it really?
Yeah, I mean the 209 was the low. That was the low point.
That was the low point, 209.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know what it was with me, but I was always a pretty slow starter, and I don't know if it was growing up in Southern California and being used to playing in warm weather, and all of a sudden now you're playing games and it's 12 degrees outside, and for some reason it always seemed like we opened not in a warm weather city. We always opened in places like Toronto or Detroit or wherever, and it was just really, really hard. There wasn't many people in the stands, and it was just always very difficult for me to play early in the season. And normally around my birthday is when I would get hot, around the middle of May. And for some reason that year I must have started a little bit sooner. But it's always good to, when you told me we wanted to talk about the 1980 season, I said, sure. I think my exact words to you were, well, yeah, why not talk about something positive? I don't want to talk about losing and stuff. Even though we lost the World Series, it was a really good experience for me that year, I think, to go out there and have the type of year I had.
Well, it's funny, I mean, because naturally that the season does end that way, and you're thinking about that you lost the World Series, but on the other hand, you guys broke through something, that barrier with the Yankees to get to the World Series, and it's hard to believe, thinking back in hindsight now, but what a young team the Royals still were then in terms of just its existence, and that was pretty significant just getting there. I know you remember it as losing to the Phillies, but getting there really was very meaningful, I assume, in hindsight.
Yeah, I think the thing that made it really, really enjoyable for me is You look back at 1976, you're tied going into the last inning of the last game of the playoffs, and Shambles hits the home run, and the next year you lose in the last inning of the last game, and the next year you lose in the fourth game of a 5-game playoff, and then finally we don't make the playoffs in 79, and then 80 sweeping them and getting into the World Series. And not to make any excuses or anything like that, but I really thought once we won the World Series, once we beat the Yankees, it was like winning the World Series, and I think if it's possible, I think we went in there a little flat. I mean, we sat around New York for like 4 days or 3 days waiting for the Phillies and the Houstons and the Houston Astros to finish their playoff games. And so we're just sitting around doing nothing for like 3 days, and we practiced I think a couple of days at Yankee Stadium because they didn't want to jump on a plane and fly to Kansas City and then have to turn around and fly back, and who knows what was going to happen in the game. We could have flown home and the next day had to leave. So I think they did the right thing, but it was just one of those things where we sat around not knowing who we were going to play. I think a lot of us really wanted to play. At least I did. I thought we had a better chance against Houston. I thought we could have handled their pitching, and but it didn't turn out that way. And as a result, we ended up going to Philadelphia, practiced there one day, and then started the playoffs. But it was a great experience for us as a team because we hadn't been there before. And I thought after that we were just going to go on a magical run. Unfortunately, that never happened.
Mm.
Hey, George, I remember during the 1980 season in the summer, the July was just ridiculous for you. And so July becomes August, and the quest for 400 continues. I recall it becoming such a national story that it was headlines every day in the newspapers. This was pre-Sports Center, but it just seemed to be on everybody's local sportscast in the evening. And I've heard from Dean Vogelaar and others over the years just how crazy things got in the clubhouse with media attention.
Yeah.
What do you remember about those days?
Well, I remember the day I went over was in Kansas City, and I got to hit my last at bat to bring it to 401. Came up and faced a guy named Mike Barlow, and he struck me out the night before on sinkers down and away. And John Watson tells a great story about this. He was sitting in front of me that day, and there was 2 outs in the 9th inning, and he was sitting, and there was runners on, two guys on, and with every pitch, every ball that Mike Barlow threw John Watson, the roars got louder and louder and louder, and sure enough, he ends up walking him, and that brought me up, and he struck me out on sinkers down and away the day before. I'll never forget this. And so I said, okay, don't try to pull a sinker. If you try to pull it, you're going to hit a ground ball to second baseman, or you're going to strike out. Just try to go with the pitch. And sure enough, he went back to the bread and butter. He got me out on the day before, and I hit a line drive over the left fielder's head that drive in 3 runs, and standing on second base, and I knew I was hitting 399 going into that at bat, so I knew I was at 400 or 401, and I think they flashed 401 on the scoreboard, and probably got one of the best ovations I've ever got in Kansas City. But little did I know, for the next month I would still be over 400, because after that game, all the media that was at that game, and we're kind of blessed, the athletes here in Kansas City, because the media isn't that strong. We don't have. We had 3 local stations and we had 1 newspaper. It's not like we had 20 newspapers like New York or Chicago or Los Angeles or Bay Area up in Northern California, or even Dallas. But there was probably maybe 10 or 15 guys in there. The guys from Topeka were there, and maybe Leavenworth or wherever in Nevada, Missouri, wherever they came in from. And so I answered these questions, and like you guys have been in the locker rooms enough, a bunch of reporters will go over and talk to one guy, and then they'll leave and go talk to somebody else. But there are so many people around my locker that people couldn't get there, so they went and talked to other people and then came over to me. So I had to answer the same questions over and over again. Well, the next day we flew to Dallas, and sure enough, that's when the live eyes. You remember the live eyes where the TV stations would broadcast live from the baseball stadium?
Yeah, I forgot
that's when that became real popular around that time. So we had 3 or 4 stations down there, 5 stations. You had the Dallas stations, the Fort Worth stations, and everybody's saying, "Hey, can we do a live eye today at 6:12? Can we do one at 6:18? Can we do one at 6:20?" I said, "Well, that's when my group's taking batting practice. I'm not going to miss it." Well, Dean Vogelar jumped on a plane the next day, and he came down, and he had talked to a guy named Bob Fischel, who was the public relations director for the Yankees in 1961 when Roger Maris was trying to hit 61 home runs. And so he said, "Dean, the only thing I could tell you is I didn't do my job. I let the media get the best of Roger. If I was you, what I would do is I would have a press conference every day before the game and after every game. So George only has to answer the questions once. He doesn't have to answer them 20 times to 20 different reporters." So every day, about 4 o'clock, at home or on the road, I'd have to go into a room, and I would talk to the reporters for, maybe 15, 20 minutes. And then after the game, they would whisk me off to another room, and I would talk to the reporters. It did make my life a lot easier, but it kind of got me out of my routine being with my teammates. And I remember one night I came back in the locker room, and everybody was showered. And I asked my brother Ken, who was on the team, and Jamie Cork, I said, "Well, where are we going tonight?" They said, "Well, I don't know where you're going. We never see you anymore." Big fella. So all of a sudden, it kind of alienated me a little bit, I think, from my teammates. But little did I know, for the next month I would still be over 400. And I found out one thing that year: it's easier to hit 400 when you're over 400 than it is when you're under. And at first I laughed at him. I said, "Yeah, there's 6 weeks to go in the season. Who knows what's going to happen? There's the highest I've ever hit before is 233. I can't see myself hitting 400. I'm just seeing the ball good right now. I'm putting the ball in play. I'm hitting all over the field. I'm part of the defense. As a result, I'm getting a lot of hits, and I feel really good. I'm seeing the ball good, and as a result, I'm just getting hits." Well, I don't know how long this is going to last. Well, after talking about it for a month, all of a sudden it became very important for me to do it. And then I went out and did the one thing that I should not have tried to do, just go out and try to hit 400. Where before I was just trying to put the ball in play and get my hits whenever they came, and if I didn't get a hit, it was no big deal. As long as we won the game, that was the most important thing, was winning the ball game. But after talking about this thing for a month, and we had a 20-game lead, winning games wasn't important to me anymore. It was getting hits. And I think that's what threw me off my game a little bit. It was the first time in my career that my performance meant more than the outcome of the game. And that's when I started to press a little bit, and as a result, the average pummeled down to about 384 when I was doing it, just thinking of myself and my performance. And then as soon as all the media left me and went home, all of a sudden I said, "Well, let's just go out and win some games," and I ended up at 500 the last 5 games. I ended up at 390. So, I learned a valuable lesson. I was 27 years old. I thought I might have another chance at it. In fact, one year I thought I had a chance. I think I was hitting 365 at the All-Star break, but never got that hot streak in the second half to get it up to 400.
In a way, you've said this in as many words, but how do you reflect on that chase now, George? I mean, it really was incredible. I mean, I was in Philadelphia at the time. Blair was probably in North Carolina, but we were certainly sports fans following it from afar because it was such an amazing story.
Well, it's something right now I really wished I would have done it. Back then it was just to say you're the last guy to hit 400. That's the highest average of any season. Tony Gwynn hit 394, I think, but that season halted. That season, what was that, 94?
Yeah.
I think it was 94.
It was.
But they ended up canceling the season with 2 months to go in the season or whatever it was. So who knows what would have happened to him. He was very similar type hitter than I was, where you could kind of maneuver the ball. You could almost pick out a spot. I know Tony didn't have as much power as I did, but he hit the ball to left field, center field. He hit the ball all over. And when you do that, it makes it hard for people to defend you. And but right now, looking back at it, I remember going home, having Thanksgiving dinner with my parents, and I walked into the house, and the first thing my dad said to me is, "You couldn't have got 5. You need to tell me with a lot of curse words. You couldn't have got 5 more freaking hits." Because I missed it by 5 4 in my career, and I think I went 5 for 5 after that game. And all I had to do was go 5 for 5. I told Jim Fry, our manager. I told John Sherholtz, our general manager. I said, hey, let me play. Hit me leadoff, DH me, and as soon as I make it out, get me out of the game. And they all said the same thing. What happens if you get hurt and we're starting the playoffs in 2 days? Is hitting 400 more important than we've been possibly winning the World Series? I said no, and they said you're not playing.
Wow, I don't think I knew that story. It would have been
interesting to know what they would have done if I was hitting 401. You hear the stories about Ted Williams was hitting 400 on the last game of the season. And everybody said, are you going to play? He says, yeah, I'm going to play. Well, they had a doubleheader. He ended up going 6 for 8 and ended up hitting 406. But it would have been very interesting because I would have hated the back end of this thing. You know, to be hitting 401 in the last game of the season and sit out.
Yeah.
I would have hated that.
Well, I
don't know if they would have taken the same approach.
Yeah.
If I was over 400 or under 400, you know, if I was at 390, if I was at 398, I'm sure they would have let me play.
Yeah.
But you know, just to go out and try to get 5 hits, which is a rarity in the game of baseball back then, as it is today, it doesn't happen very often. But like I said, I did it before, and I did it afterwards. Who knows? I felt very confident. I felt very good about it, about going out there, and just as soon as I make it out, get me out of the game. And they just didn't agree with that. And when they told me the logic, what happens if I get hurt, I agreed with their logic. So it was kind of a dual decision.
It's funny, yeah. I mean, there's no way to know how that would have gone, but it is. I'm just looking at the numbers right here. You would, yeah. If you had gone 5 for 5, you would have been 180 for 520, and there you are, right on the button.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I was told 5 hits, and you look back over the course of the year, that's less than 1 hit a month. A line drive here, you know, I remember that year I was over 400. We went to Seattle. I went 1 for 11. My only hit was off a left-hander. I forget his name. I went 1 for 11. I didn't strike out 1 time. Mario Mendoza was their shortstop. He robbed me of 3 hits up the middle. And they had a little center fielder named Johnny Moses, I believe. And he dove in left center, once in left center and once in right center, made these headlong diving catches. We have a 21-game lead, and they're playing it like it's the 7th game of the World Series, and they're probably 40 games out of first place. But I went 1 for 11 in that series, and the average went from like 401 to 392. And I think I hit the ball hard like 7 or 8 times out of the 11 at-bats. But my only hit was a home run.
Well, you know, the other thing...
I hit the ball hard. I mean, I hit the ball hard, and I hit the left center, right center, up the middle. I was hitting it, you know, where I, you know, not always hit it because I kind of used the whole field, but they made some plays on my ass which really came back to hurt me.
I'm just thinking, too, about the injuries you had. I'm embarrassed. I can't remember what if they were the same injuries.
I was killing second base in Cleveland,
yeah.
And the catcher threw a high throw, and Jerry Dubinsky was the shortstop, and I saw him just as I was and I didn't get that thick jump, and it was earlier in the year. This might have been in July or April, May, June. It might have been in June. And I didn't get that good a jump, and I saw him waiting for the ball, and I said, God, I got to take one more step so I could beat the throw, and I ended up tearing the ligaments in my right ankle. I slid about a foot from the bag and rolled over, and they carried me off the field in a stretcher, and they sent me home the next day, and I missed like a month or 5 weeks of the season back in June. I think it was beginning of June, or end of June, beginning of July. And at that time, I don't know what I was hitting, but normally, you know, back then, you didn't have these rehab stints where they send you down to the minor leagues so you can get your timing back. You'd come off the DL and you'd play the next day, and sure enough, I came off the DL. I was able to take batting practice for a few days and felt pretty good, ran the bases, and all of a sudden they activated me, put me back in the lineup, and it normally takes you, you know, 4 or 5 games to get your timing back, but I was so locked in that year that as soon as I got back in the lineup, it was like I'd never missed a game.
It looks to me like you had 21 hits in the next 10 games, something like that, which is pretty amazing. 2 4 for 5s.
Well,
yeah.
just think if they had rehab, I could have hit 400 in AAA that year.
Hey, it's Blair. we have a special subscription offer for SportsBeat KC listeners, unlimited digital access to the Kansas City Stars award-winning sports coverage. Sign up now for 1 year of Sports Pass for access to all the sports news, features, and columns presented on the kansascity.com site, and it's only $30. That's a 40% savings off our regular rate. Your subscription will automatically renew after the initial term at $50 unless you tell us to cancel. Your subscription helps support the sports coverage of kansascity.com and the Kansas City Star, and that support has never been more important. Please visit kansascity.com/SportsBeatKC offer to get this special offer. And as always, thanks for listening.
You mentioned this earlier, and it just was something that had been on my mind a little bit too. Jim Fry wasn't with you guys very long, and as you know, of course, he died the other day. And
yeah,
I just wonder your reflections on him and what role he did or didn't have in how things played out.
Well, he was obviously, if you're going to hit 390 and you go to the World Series and you sweep the Yankees in the playoffs, he did a great job.
Yeah.
Did a fantastic job. He was a guy that I got to know. It's funny, a lot of these guys that became our managers, like Whitey Herzog, I knew Whitey when he was a third base coach. Dick Hauser, I knew Dick when he was a third base coach. Jim Fry, I knew Jim when he was a third base coach because I played third base. So you're always talking to him between innings and before the game and stuff. And so I knew Jim pretty well, probably more than anybody else on the ball club when he was named manager. And so he and I already had a relationship. And I had that type of year. I mean, he was the easiest guy in the world to play for. I mean, he was pretty simple. I always say Whitey was one of the hardest guys to play for because he demanded a lot of things. Dick Hauser was pretty easy. John Watson, an ex-teammate, was real easy. Hal McRae, ex-teammate, was real easy. But Jim Fry was about as easy as it could get because, I mean, how could it be difficult to play for him when you got a 21-game lead in September and you're hitting 390s? Pretty easy guy. I mean, he was easy to get along with and probably got along really well with a lot of people in 1980. In 1981, probably was a little bit tougher because he ended up getting fired, because our performance was a little lackluster after going to the World Series.
It was interesting to see, just in reflecting on that, too, that, I mean, there wasn't much cushion for him, it seemed, after the year before.
Well, I think it was 10 and 20. Were we 10 and 20 or something?
Yeah.
And he got fired because I remember reading the article in the paper about him when he passed away. And he and I have some good mutual friends that he plays golf a lot with, or he played golf with a lot. One of them is a Kansas City guy, Jack Frazee. And Jack and him are good friends. And I've actually played in a golf tournament in the Bahamas. And I'm on Pat Brooks' team here in Kansas City, and Jim was always on Jack's team. So it was always fun to see him coach. And in fact, that's what Jack calls him to this day. And in fact, I got a call from Jack the day that he died before the media found out about it. He just said, "I'm just giving you a heads up. Your old skipper died, Jim Fry. He had some saliva cancer or something, or whatever those glands are. He had cancer. He was 88 years old and died down in Florida. But he was good. He was a fun guy to be around. Always, he told a lot of jokes and always had a smile on his face. Which, your first year managing, you win your division by 22 games. I'd have a smile on my face too.
Hey, no matter how this season unfolds, it's going to be different than any baseball season that we've probably ever seen. And it just occurs to me that when you mentioned the 1981 season, that was really unique as well. And I'm just wondering how you think teams will manage, I don't know, 100-game and 80-game season. It was certainly different in 1981, but it was odd and it was out of the routine, and that's what we're looking at for baseball this year.
Yeah, I'm hoping they can get half a season in, and if they have to go to Florida and play maybe, a month down there and then open up the big stadiums in their cities, if this coronavirus gets under control a little bit, every day there's news on it. I don't know anybody that's had it. I don't know anybody. I know one guy that's been tested. know a lot of people that are really taking all the safe routes, quarantining themselves. I've been to the grocery store twice. When I go, I wear a mask, I wear gloves. I'll be going to the grocery store today to get some chicken because I'm going to grill some chicken tonight. But hopefully they can get this thing figured out. I mean, I think not only it would be good for baseball, but I think it'd be good for our country to get baseball back on TV and it just kind of be like, okay, look, we're making progress. Well, let's play some baseball. And if people have to be quarantined in Arizona, I don't know how that would work. Playing in front of empty stands, I don't know how that would work. I know I wouldn't like it, but if it was the only way I could play the game that I love to play and you get paid and that's your livelihood, I mean, that you make the most of it. And just hopefully that we'll be able to get this thing under control and start the season, hopefully by the All-Star break. Get at least a half season in.
George, I didn't really get to talk to you down there, but I got to say hi to you one day down in Surprise as we were in passing, and I wonder if you had enough time down there to get any sort of impressions of Mike Matheny as the manager and even of the change with John Sherman taking over as owner. I know you've known John before, but just curious about any in particular impressions you've taken in this brief time.
Well, I met Mike. His first year in spring training was not this year, last year, when he got let go by the Cardinals. Much like the Royals did with Ned Yost, they hired him as a senior advisor to Dayton, realizing that, hey, if we have to make a managerial change, this is the guy we want. And so let's get him on board now so he can get to know the organization a little bit. We can get to know him a little bit. And so I met Mike then. He would suit up and you'd get there and he'd be in his workout clothes, and then we'd go out and have practice. He would be in his street clothes, and I'd say, why don't you put on your uniform or something? He says, no, I'm not a coach. I'm just here working out. And it was much like Ned Yost, much like Dale Swain this year, Mike Jershman. They didn't put on uniforms, and they've always had uniforms on. And he just got to know the organization a little bit. But I was really impressed with him. He'd have meetings every day, little inspirational meetings. He brought in guest speakers. He was very organized. The guys really took to him. They worked out hard. They were quick workouts, but there was no wasting time. Everybody seemed to get their work in a professional manner. I think everybody was very pleased with him. The players all liked him. He has one-on-one meetings with them. I did a conference call or a Zoom call the other day with all our scouts, all our amateur scouts. And I guess they've been doing that a lot. They've been having guest speakers. They had Urban Myers. They had Tom Crean, a football coach and a basketball coach, just talking about, their games and how they go about their thing and what they're doing during the lockout or the quarantine. And it's pretty interesting. And I got on one with Mike Matheny the other day, and he was just talking about, a lot of things. And then I found out the next day that the Royals, they set out something to the Royals. I guess they've been talking to groups of players on Zoom, like Terry Bradshaw will get some of the hitters together, and they'll just talk, okay, here's what we should be working on now. Make sure you do this when you're hitting. And the same with the pitching coach, and the same with everybody. All the coaches are probably doing these Zoom calls. And the Royals had a trivia game on a Zoom call. They had 48 players from spring training playing trivia. Now that's pretty good team chemistry right there. When you can do that, you get 48 guys to sign up for trivia night on Zoom call. So I think he's brought the team together a little bit. The way he treated the young kids, the Khalil Lees, the Nicky Heaths, guys like that. I mean, they really enjoyed spring training. They felt part of the team, and I think that's all Mike Matheny's doing, because he made the locker room everybody's locker room and made everybody feel like they were part of the ball club.
I love the idea of that trivia game. That's I
wasn't invited to play. I would have liked to have gone up against some of those guys.
And George, you've probably known John Sherman for a little while, just around Kansas City.
No, well, actually, I went to his house one night for a fundraiser, and I didn't realize it was his house. when he bought the ball club, I got a call from Emily, Dayton's secretary, and said John Sherman would love to have lunch with you one day. I went to his office. We sat there. We were supposed to sit there for an hour. We sat there for 2 hours just talking, getting to know one another. And then I ended up leaving. And then I saw him in spring training. Very nice man. The one thing that I really like about what he did, the type of group he put together, is that everybody that invested along with him into this ball club has Kansas City ties. They either grew up here, went away to college, became successful in other cities, or they grew up someplace else, now live in Kansas City, and make Kansas City their residence. But we have all Kansas City people that are part owners of this ball club, and I think that's really, really important. Obviously, Ewing Kaufman was a great Kansas City, and David Glass, down from Northwest Arkansas. He bought a home in Kansas City, but I don't think David really ever became, that attached to the city, where I think all the owners that we have now are attached to the city and will do everything and anything they possibly can do to make this franchise a success again.
George, when was that fundraiser with when you went to Johnstown?
I don't even know when it was. I have no idea, but my wife remembered. I didn't remember him. I know who he is now, though. He's our boss. And he's got a pretty good sense of humor. I'm sure he's not very happy right now. His first year owning it. I ran into one of the investors the other day. He's a member of my country club, and I saw him, and I said, "Tom, how you doing? How you like being a part of a baseball ownership group?" He said, "I miss baseball, and it's a bad year to be an owner." Bad year to be an owner. His first year, he's looking forward to the season, and I remember all the owners were down there when they canceled spring training, and they had a little tent right there by the locker room. And we had Freddie Podtek and John Mayberry and Dennis Leonard and Amos Otis were in town as guest instructors, and all of a sudden they come over and they say, "Hey, would you guys mind going over there? These owners just found out that spring training was canceled, and we need to cheer them up a little bit." So we all went over there and kind of walked around with him and talked to him for a long time. But it's a good group he's put together, and I know a bunch of them, and I'm sure I'll get to know a bunch of them a little bit more.
George, you've been very generous with your time. Just one last thought, unless you want to add something else about 1980, but one last thought I have. You mentioned this about the ownership group all being related to Kansas City, and I find myself thinking back to 1980 and wondering if you had any idea then that you would become basically a lifelong Kansas Cityan now.
Well, I didn't know back then. I knew in 1984 when I signed my last contract with the Royals. Everett Fogelman was part owner of the ball club back then. He wanted me to sign an extension. I already had about 3 years left on my contract, and so he and I started negotiating, and next thing you know, Mr. Kaufman got involved. And one of the things Mr. Kaufman said was, "This is way too much money. We're not giving them that." And so me and Mr. Kaufman didn't see eye to eye for a while, but me and Mr. Fogelman did. And so we signed a contract, and it basically said, if you finish your career with the Kansas City Royals, well, that was the lifetime contract I signed. You'll be vice president for life. And so Everett had some ideas that we were going to do, and unfortunately he had to sell the team, and I'm just glad that Mr. Glass has honored that. I'm glad that Mr. Sherman has honored that, and I will be. One thing I take a lot of pride in is loyalty, and I think the one thing, I know there's only two people that have worked in this organization longer than I have. Denny Matthews, the announcer, who started the first game, the first official game with Buddy Blattner back in 1969, and Art Stewart. Art's still employed by the organization, and I think he was signed in 1969 also as a scout in the system, and then I signed out of high school in 1971. So, I love to tell people I'm from Kansas City. I think I'm still the biggest Kansas City Royal baseball fan in the world, and Kansas City's where I'm always going to live. Granted, I have a home in Arizona, which I spend a little bit of the winter probably going to go back there when spring training starts again, and the season, if it starts in Arizona, I'll probably move back there for 2 or 3 weeks or whatever Dayton wants me to do. But Kansas City will always be my home. I'm never going to move from here.
Well, George, we're grateful that you're here and grateful you spent all this time with us, and just can't thank you enough, and appreciate you letting us reflect with you on 1980 and what you're going through now.
Yeah, it was a fun year. We need more years like that.
Okay.
But
Thanks,
2014, 2015 weren't bad either.
No, they were not.
And 85 wasn't bad.
That will do it for today. Thanks to our production staff of Derek Donovan, Savannah Smith, Randy Mason, Beth Welsh, Jeff Rosen, and Chris Fickett. A tip of the cap to George Brett, who was so generous with his time, and, of course, to my buddy Vahe Gregorian. Links to the stories we discuss, including Vahe's column, which posted on Wednesday on kansascity.com, can be found in the show notes. Hey, earlier in the episode, you heard me talk about the Sports Pass offer, and it's still good. $30 for a year's worth of sports coverage. Come on, that's a terrific deal. But here's an even better offer. Buy the entire Kansas City Star product. Sports, news, features, commentary, and analysis, the whole bit. You get all the stories written by my talented colleagues, and the details can be found at account.kansascity.com/subscribe. That's account.kansascity.com/subscribe. Here's something else to consider. Maybe you already subscribe and you want to help more. You can help us there also. For the past 2 months, no one's covered or told the story of the Kansas City area during the COVID pandemic like the Kansas City Star. And there is a place to simply make a tax-deductible contribution to the Star that will help us continue to report on the coronavirus and how it's impacting our communities. To donate, go to givebutter.com/Kansas City Star. That's givebutter.com/Kansas City Star. All the help is greatly appreciated, and whether it's the Sports Pass, the full subscription, or a donation, you're helping us with our news coverage and helping deliver products like SportsBeat KC. And we'll be back on Thursday with another episode. Thanks for listening.